Talked about general stuff in the other video, so I thought I'd do a separate video on two interesting hands from the Helsinki tournament. One of which I hopefully got right, and the other one I definitely got wrong, but hopefully both will bring up an interesting principle. The first came when I still didn't have too many chips to spare, with still 7 players left and about 500,000 less than the average stack, and raised to 40k on the 16k big blind of the young Swedish kid who eventually won it, who was kind of an even better version of what he seemed to be, and what he seemed to be was kind of a young, thinking internet player. So I raised his 16k blind to 40k with ace queen offsuit, and we saw a flop of jack of diamonds, 8 of hearts, 5 of hearts. He checked. I would normally check, but I was just aware I was going to bet so many turns, I might make it easier for myself to try and take it there by betting 50k into 85, but I didn't. He called, and we saw another bad turn card of the 8 of diamonds, so the board's now jack 7-5 with 2 hearts and 8, which is the second diamond. He checked, and I obviously checked behind. And the river seemed to hit me really nicely. It was an offsuit ace. It was the ace of clubs, so I felt good about my hand until he bet 101 into the 135 in the pot, so a pretty big bet. If he bet 65, I'd have to snap his hand off because there's some value bets I can beat, but 101 I had to think. And basically, in these kind of spots where you're thinking, have I got the best hand or not, the first thing to ask is, what am I beating? I.e., you're always beating a bluff. Can I beat any value bets as well? And here I was pretty certain that I couldn't. Something like ace 10 of hearts, a misflushed or turned into a top pair, worried me a bit, but I just felt the bet sizing would be a little different with that, and he wouldn't necessarily bet as much as kind of 3/4 pot, which he did. The reason I felt comfortable that I was only beating a bluff was that, of course, from his point of view, he has to expect that a hand like ace queen or ace king makes up a decent part of my range. I mean, I think some people make the mistake of presuming that an early position raiser will always be hit by an ace, which obviously isn't true, but it's definitely safe to assume that that is the raiser's card, an ace. So that if someone bets into it, then he's pretty much saying, I know this is kind of beginner's level stuff, but I think it's probably fair to say he's pretty much saying that he can beat a one-pair ace. So, because he wouldn't bet 101k for value with a hand like King Jack or something like that, where he fancied his kicker on a flop top pair was good, I was pretty certain I was only beating a bluff. So, the interesting thing about this is that when the ace came, it seemed a really good card, but as soon as he bets that amount, and I polarise his range to some extent to either 2-pair or better or a bluff, then actually I'm very little better there with ace queen than I am with, say, a pair of 10s in this scenario, after he's bet, of course, rather than when the cards come. Then a pair of 10s is not much worse than ace queen, which is pretty interesting to think about, and it basically says that ace queen shouldn't be an auto call there. So I had a really, really long thing, and basically on jack 7-5 8 ace, there didn't seem to be too many hands he would value bet, because if he's flopped 2-pair or better, I'm pretty sure he's coming after me on the flop, because he can just represent a draw so hard on that flop. So I figured that if I was beaten by 2-pair, it would either have to be 2-pair he picks up on the turn, 8-7 was the only realistic possibility, or 2-pair he picks up on the end, which obviously was the slightly more realistic possibility if he's defending his blind with ace jack or ace 7 or something like that. But there's still not too many hands I can beat. At the same time, it's one of these spots where there's very little value, there's few value bets, but possibly even fewer bluffs. And it really seemed that only something like King Queen of Hearts, King 10 of Hearts would be an airball here, and he might want to bluff with. So I eventually thought there's probably fewer bluffs than value bets. He's got to think an ace has hit my range. And although obviously I'm having a really long think with ace queen, in fact this was the hand that I thought for about 8 minutes and eventually never even said anything, but just let the clock that was called on me eventually die on me and hit 0 seconds. But most players will presume if I've got an ace I have to call there, which still exists in a world when even some players are thinking about passing an ace. So it's just pretty much presumed I'd have to call. So I eventually let it go. From his reaction afterwards then, when we talked about the hand, it seemed that he had it, but who knows, but hopefully that was a good laydown. The other interesting pot, definitely I didn't play well, is now a battle of the blinds against the same kid. So we must have been down to 3 at this point, I think, where we're all playing deep and all about the same 1 million chip stack. He limps, and he'd been raising absolutely tons from the small blind, so his range for limping is kind of semi-weak. And I've got Queen Jack off and check it behind, which is questionable, but I want to play small pots because I felt the the other guy was a bit live when we were three-handed. So I check Queen Jack behind, it comes Ace 7-4 with 2 hearts. And he checks, and I have to bet him mainly because I've got the best hand, probably 60% plus of the time. So I bet 35 into 50, and he called. I was ready to give up, but a Jack turned to give me now probably the best hand. He checked. I checked behind for pot control on a board of Ace Jack 7-4. Even though you think you have the best hand, then it's often better to check behind for pot control because he might just get sick and check raise with a draw or pulling a really strong play. Obviously, he might check raise with a better hand. It pot controls nicely so that I don't value own myself against an ace or a turn 2 pair. And the main point is when I pot control the turn, it gets me better value on the end, and he still may have to check call a value bet with something like a 7. So I check rivers A3 to make the board Ace 7-4 Jack 3. And I'm still feeling pretty sure that I've got the best hand. 6-5 hit, but it's probably not in his range because blind on white, he's going to get aggressive with that on the flop. So I'm pretty sure I've got the best hand. Something now strange happens. For the first time he makes a small value bet, he bets 35 into like 125 or something. Instant reaction in this spot is I've only got the second pair, I haven't got a raise. That wasn't my instant reaction, but I eventually did just flat call and saw Queen 7 for the third pair, but with a good kicker, which he was very definitely value betting, obviously. But the principle is here is that just sometimes you can not only get thin value from a bet, but very thin value from a raise. And I really think I had a value raise here with just the second pair. Main reason is on that flop, the ace really is a blank in a pot that's limped, and then I checked behind from the big blind. The ace is a blank, which so the jack is almost acting as if it was the top pair on the board. And his bet of 35k in the end screams that he was considering his 7 to be good on the flop. Puts me on something like a 7, and obviously his queen kicker is almost definitely good. So I think I can raise, and not only raise his 35k, but to raise it to something like 135. So it's a spot where I'm very likely to get big value with just the second pair, I think. Reason being that once he bets 35, it marks his hand so much as marginal that it gives me a big opportunity to bluff, or at least he's going to think so if I don't have anything. So actually what I do have may seem small, but it's a lot bigger in this spot. And I think that's a bad mistake for me, actually, not to raise it to 100 more, or possibly even more than that, if I really want to try and sell a bluff. Anyway, I hope those two hands were interesting. There'll be more from Bolton tomorrow, and I'll do another video sometime next week.